Hey guys, and welcome to the Warlock Destruction Guide. And first things first, let's talk about what changes 7.2.5 have brought us really quick. A lot of them were just damage value changes, so I'll add that in the background if you want to read through that, but the big main change to destruction was on your resources, making you generate soul shard fragments instead of actual soul shards. Somewhat like the old burning embers that we had before Legion. And abilities like Incinerate, Dimensional Rift, and Immolate Thix now always build those fragments. And those 10 fragments will equal 1 soul shard, which is what you're gonna use for casting your spells just like before. Fragments are just what you build up. All of that will amount to making your gameplay far more smoother, basically removing those weird downtimes and the overflow of resources that you sometimes would otherwise get, but I'll go more in depth on that during the rotation gameplay part of the guide with all the implications surrounding this new system and explaining it a little bit better. Okay? Plus you had big boosts to your Chaos Bolt damage, Rain of Fire damage and Channel Demon Fire damage throughout, so overall some very nice buffs to destruction. And in my opinion, those changes were in dire need because it plays so much better now in every scenario. But again, more on those changes later on as we go over the guide. Anyway, let's go over your artifact traits just for those still building them up. Any meaningful traits will again, like the changes, be mentioned in the rotation/gameplay. So now, stats, and when you first think about destruction, you probably immediately think about crits, but actually isn't your primary one. Stats are always a weird thing in WoW, especially in Legion with all the different gearing that we have and tier sets, so I always advise to do your own stat weights if you want to be completely sure what's gonna benefit you the most. But usually the way it goes, and I had it simulate different stats, is intellect, so item level, haste, crit, versatility and mastery, or haste, crit, intellect, versatility and mastery. The difference between them were minimal, but they were still there. In general though, your primary focus will be to get as much haste as you can, preferably combined with crits, and try to get your eye level as high as possible as well. While along the way, if you do get some mastery or versatility gear with a much higher item level than that haste or crit gear, feel free to equip it as the actual numbers aren't too far from each other, as you can see on the left side, okay? Now this thinking will shift with the tier 20 set bonus, but before that, let's go over what the stats do to you and understand why you want them. The reason I said you might think crit is your go-to stat, it's because it's actually pretty easy to misinterpret, because crit gives you bigger Chaos Bolts. Chaos Bolts always crits. So more crit you have is just gonna increase its damage, and critting with your other spells like Incinerate, Immolate Thix is gonna give you an extra soul shard fragments. So it seems pretty fantastic, but actually no, because haste is gonna increase how fast you're gonna cast Incinerates, how fast Immolate Thix, reduce the cooldown of your conflagrate, and just overall how fast you cast. Plus, reducing global cooldowns and the pet casts as well. Meaning you are gonna build up far more soul shards with higher haste than the more RNG based crits. And more soul shards is what you need so you can cast those Chaos Bolts or Rain of Fire. Okay? And the bonus damage on Chaos Bolt with the crit isn't really that worth to invest in. Now, you still obviously want the crits as it's your secondary stat and also gives you more shards at random, but it's still not what you want to focus. You're gonna get far more shards by stacking up haste. Not only that, you have specific abilities that are made that you have to time spells during its time frame, which haste is also gonna help you. As for mastery or chaotic energies, it kind of works like versatility or crit combined. It increases your damage overall depending on your stat percentage and reduces your damage taken, so like versatility, but it can also trigger extra damage at random. So for an example, if you have 50% mastery, you're gonna get a flat 25% damage increase at all times on all of your spells, but you also get an extra 25% damage increase at random in one of your spells that you cast, for a total of the 50% extra damage you have on your mastery. Sort of like a crit mixed in that versatility, if that makes sense. Okay? It stacks really quite high, but in general you don't want to focus on it too much. But that completely changes once you have acquired the tier 20 from the tomb, because the 4th set bonus allows your Chaos Bolt to always benefit from your chaotic energies, or mastery, fully to its maximum damage. So no more randomness, and your Chaos Bolt is gonna hit super hard. Meaning, I was gonna say something there, meaning if you have 70% mastery, your Chaos Bolt is gonna hit 70% harder, instead of the 35% more damage and then a chance for the other 25%. So, once you have acquired the tier 24 set bonus, you want to stack up that mastery high, taking priority above all your other stats. And although haste is still gonna be important to you and become your secondary stat, that is the way it's being predicted. But to make sure, again, you can do your own stat weights once you get it. The other stat bonus is gonna give you an extra soul shard fragment on your incinerate for a total of 3 or 4 if you crit. So making haste even more powerful, since casting incinerates faster is gonna build even more soul shards for those powerful Chaos Bolts, okay? So overall, that's what you should be thinking on your stats before and after the tier 20. Now, talents, and there's been some changes here as well, and I'll go over them as I go. And I'm gonna give some examples of when you should be using certain talents, but those examples are gonna come from the Nighthold, because this video has been made before the tomb, but it should give you an idea what to get once we get to the actual Tomb of Sargeras and see all of those bosses, okay? So in tier 1, there's Backdraft, which is pretty much the talents that you want, boosting your conflict rate, which is one of your main sources of soul shard fragments. This talent is then giving you a buff, making your next 2 incinerates or Chaos Bolt cast 30% quicker, which is pretty good to get them Chaos Bolts out there faster and giving you some thinking behind using your conflict rates, instead of mindlessly using them. Roaring Blaze can somewhat work, but the damage it gives you is generally not worth to take, and the same goes for Shadowburn, giving you an extra 5 soul shard fragments if the target dies after 5 seconds of its use, instead of just 5, and it can work for out and about in the world or leveling, and although it can technically be used in dungeons, is generally not enough to take over Backdraft, okay? Tier 2, you're gonna get some pretty interesting choices, especially with the 7.2.5 changes. Reverse Entropy is mostly a quality of life choice, removing the mana aspect of destruction, which is a common trend in the Warlock, that mana actually gets spent and you need to life tap. This talent basically removes that while boosting your Rain of Fire and Chaos Bolt for 10% extra damage. If you want the best DPS available for your character, this isn't the choice you want, except when there's heavy AoEing and combining with some later talents it can be good, but in general, if you don't want to worry about mana or have any more extra thought in your rotation, it can still be viable. Now, Empowered Life Tap is going to increase your overall damage by 10% for 20 seconds after using Life Tap, which is going to provide a pretty good boost to your overall damage, and is basically jack of all trades. It works for any scenario, instead of just Chaos Bolt or Rain of Fire like Reverse Entropy, okay? So, as I said, great for everything. It's pretty easy to fit in your rotation since you're gonna need the mana now, and then you can keep it up and the 20 seconds closely match when you should life tap for the mana anyway. It's just forcing you to use it at max mana when you start up a fight, which can be a little bit awkward, but the damage increase is totally worth it. Eradication though is gonna give you the biggest DPS increase in single target, but is not entirely easy to use because the idea behind it is that your Chaos Bolt is gonna apply a debuff on the target that is gonna increase your damage by 50% for 7 seconds, so a bigger DPS increase than Empowered Life Tap, but is a debuff, not a buff, so really only works in single target or cleaving with Havoc, and on that alone is gonna change up your rotation. More on that in a bit. But not only that, it requires a good amount of haste to use it properly. So isn't the choice I recommend if you are new to Destruction, you just want to use it once you have some pretty good gear. If not, it can lead to some weird moments, then you won't be able to take full advantage out of it, okay? But overall, Empowered Life Tap is the best choice throughout, Eradication best for single target, but only if you have good gear, and Reverse Entropy if you cannot be harassed about mana, okay? Tier 3 is pretty much up to you. Shadow Fury adds some utility by giving you an AoE stun, so pretty good for Mythic pluses. Demonic Circle for that precious mobility that you so lack. Mortal Coil when neither of those are needed, and you can get it for the heal, which can be useful sometimes. Tier 4 also offers some interesting choices, and to put it simple, Soul Harvest in general is your best pick for single target fights or with some light cleave. It's essentially a DPS cooldown which you also lack on, giving a 20% damage increase to you and your pets for 12 seconds or more depending how many aimlates you have active, hence good for light cleaving as well. Overall, if you want the best DPS for most boss fights, this is what you want. Fire and Brimstone is purely for AoE, sustained AoE at that, making your incinerates hit all nearby targets, providing a pretty hefty DPS increase, plus each target hit counts towards your soul shard fragment buildup, allowing you to use a lot more Rain of Fires, and combining well with reverse entropy so you don't go out of mana from all of that Rain of Fire and incinerate spam. But again, if you're taking power life tap, you can just use it for mana, so it's pretty easy. But again, only worthwhile if it's in a sustained AoE fight. If it ends quickly, not really worth it. A good example would be Scorpiron with all of them adds, or some Mythic pluses where the mob packs are big and strong enough, as in with meaningful HP and don't die after 5 seconds. If that's the case, Cataclysm would be the best choice. Overall, great for Mythic pluses. It hits really hard and applies immolate to all targets, so you don't have to top target multi-dot. It's on a 30-second cooldown as opposed to the 45 that was before. Great when you need that on-demand AoE burst damage also. A good example would be Spellblade with her adds that appear in those intervals and you just want to take them out quick. Cataclysm would work better here comparing to Fire and Brimstone. For dungeons, what to use, you can have to see for yourself which dungeon you're going in to make that decision. But Cataclysm is also the only option that technically works for any situation, be AoE, single target, cleave and whatnot, so something to keep in mind if you don't like talent switching. Tier 5 is once again up to you. I personally like Burning Rush for the mobility, but you have to be careful as it drains your health. Demon Skin is a nice passive option, or Dark Pact, so you can get a powerful shield to suck up some damage, especially since your mobility is non-existent. I cannot emphasize that enough. In Tier 6, you get your Grimoires. Grimoire of Sacrifice is pretty awful to you, unless you don't care about maximizing your damage and don't want the nuisance that can be your pet, you can take it. Grimoire of Supremacy can be a good passive option, allowing you to summon your Infernal or Doomguard permanently. Small damage boost, but your Doomguard provides you with a very much needed interrupt, and the Infernal not only tanks, is actually a good pet to AoE with. But Grimoire of Service will by far provide the highest damage increase, but is relatively harder to use, basically allowing you to summon a second pet for 25 seconds and doing 100% more damage, but costing 1 soul shard. So an extra DPS cooldown, plus it gives you a little bit more utility for interrupt, CC or cleansing if needed, since you can choose either of your pets. Not only that though, using Grimoire of Supremacy for an example, you actually lose one of your DPS cooldowns, which is to summon your Doomguard, which does far more damage than the permanent one you can summon. By taking the service talent, you retain that cooldown, plus you get another summon to boost your damage. But if you don't want to go through another cooldown, Supremacy can still work, it just won't provide you the biggest DPS increase. And lastly, Tier 7. Overall, Channel Demon Fire is the best choice for single target, burst AoE or even cleave, requiring your immolates to be up to be usable, but you want to be active 100% of the time, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. It's gonna send 15 flames to your target, doing quite some damage, plus cleaving all nearby. Now, one thing that is sometimes confusing to new Destruction Warlocks is how the AoE factor of it works, but no matter how many immolates you have active, the damage will be the same as it only sends 15 embers, alright? If you're gonna get more mobs, obviously will do more damage since it sort of cleaves, but the amount of immolates is unimportant for the ability, okay? Overall, it's a very hard-hitting ability, especially now with the buffs. As for Wreak Havoc, has kinda been nerfed. Your Havoc now is on a 45-second cooldown and lasts 10 seconds. this talent is only reducing its cooldown to 25 seconds, but the duration stays the same, so arguably weaker than it was before, but still a great choice if you're gonna be cleaving frequently. A good example would be like a fight like Elastan with those 1 to 2 priority adds that you want to take out fast, so a fight like that, the reduction of cooldown will be perfect for those more frequent havocs, okay? Great for some mythic pluses as well when they don't have big trash packs. As for Soul Conduit, is underperforming in single target, at least at the moment, but it might change in the future, especially with the tier 20 set bonus, so maybe you don't want to lose time casting Channel Demon Fire, you probably just want to focus on Chaos Bolt, but even now can work amazingly if combined with Fire and Brimstone for that spam of Rain of Fire that I said earlier, and that we are going to talk about more in the rotation. Soul Conduit has a 50% chance per soul shard consumed to give you 1 shard back. In single target, while doing Chaos Bolts here and there that only cost 2 shards isn't really that worth to take, at least right now, but when you start doing constant Rain of Fires that cost 3 shards, it can actually help you keeping up that consistency and adding even more Rains of Fire in there. So pretty goddamn good. Okay, and that covers your talents. Let's move over to the rotation of what you should be doing during your actual gameplay. And we are going to do this by phases, okay? First, we're going to do your opener, then your normal rotation, basically what you want to do after you do your opener and basically what you want to do all the time. Then cleaving with Havoc and how to use it, and finalize with AoE and go over how much your thinking changes depending on your talent choices, okay? Okay, let's start with your single target rotation and opener, starting with Backdraft, Empowered Life Tap, Soul Harvest, Grimoire of Service and Channel Demon Fire. As for pets, you always want your Imp. It does by far the highest damage of any of your pets, improved by your artifact rates and emulates. Plus it can cleanse magic debuffs and heal you for a little bit. So since we are using Empowered Life Tap, the first thing you want to do before every fight is use Life Tap, and you always want to keep track of it to maintain it. You really want that 10% damage increase up at all times. Then you want to use your emulate, applying a dot, and with each tick is gonna generate you 1 soul shard fragment, or 2 if it crits. And like the Life Tap buff, you want to keep it active 100% of the time. But before moving forward, the explanation of the soul shard fragments. They are actually quite simple to understand. In 7.2 you simply possessed 5 soul shards, like any other specs in Warlock, and you still do, but unlike Affliction or Demo, you never generate soul shards now, simply fragments. What does that mean? It means instead of your emulate sticks have a chance to give you a flat out shard or on your conflagrates, you're gonna slowly build a soul shard with the fragments that are made up of 10. Meaning you're gonna need to build 10 fragments to generate 1 soul shard. So you could say that Chaos Bolt that still needs 2 soul shards costs 20 fragments. Okay? Now, like I said in the beginning, this is preventing an overflow of resources and downtimes like you had before, because practically all of your abilities now are always slowly building soul shard fragments. Instead, like before, you were reliant on conflagrates and emulate ticks on an RNG to get them. And you had to fill in time with incinerates, which did nothing besides flat damage, which was quite annoying and led to bad gameplay. Okay, now that you have your emulate up and you start generating shards passively, you want to follow that up with conflagrates and get 5 fragments and backdraft from your talent. You always want conflagrates cooldown ticking, but I'll go more into that during your normal rotation, okay? Now, before you start popping your other cooldowns, you want to build some soul shards with your incinerate. 3 or 4 incinerates should be fine because you're gonna spend 2 shards in your pet summons, so you're gonna need to get 4+ shards so you can put an extra Chaos Bolt during your burst. A must if you're still using the tier 19 set bonus for that extra cast speed when Chaos Bolts are cast in succession, okay? When you reach that point is when you start using your cooldowns. Summon Imp from the Grimoire of Service. If you want the highest damage from that talent, the Imp is the way to go. Then summon Doomguard or Infernal. If you want the little ones going in from your trait Lord of Flames, it's on a 10-minute cooldown, so you can only use it once per fight, and is more useful to you if used in a multiple mob scenario, but if it's completely single target, you can use it here anyway, okay? then Dimensional Rift, and you want to use 2 charges from it. You can use all 3, but you always want to try and bank 1 in case you need to move, since it's one of your few instant abilities that you have, okay? But if you know that you won't need to move, you can use all 3 because they're gonna net you 3 shard fragments each, as opposed to nothing like it was before. Only then you use your Soul Harvest, boosting your damage by 20% and of your pets. All of them. You only want to use it now because you have everything properly set up, creating a synergy between all of your CDs. Then your conflict rates should be reaching the 2 charges, so you want to use it and get Backdraft again. Then cast 2 of your Chaos Pulse and you basically enter your normal rotation. That's essentially the order that you want to do your opener, setting up your spells in such a way so you don't waste precious uptime like in Soul Harvest, and immediately using spells to get the cooldowns going to allow you to maximize its uses, like Conflagrate, and preparing for the 2 Chaos Bolts right in the beginning. Okay? Now, there's a couple of things to take in mind that will change your opener, which is Eradication. Sort of, but it's something that you have to keep in mind always, all the time in your rotation, so I'll go more on that later. If you're gonna be cleaving with Havoc, will also change slightly, but like Eradication, I'll go over that in a bit. Any other change will come from using Reverse Entropy, because you're simply not gonna need to use Life Tap, so you can just remove that. Everything else stays the same, and if you're using Grimoire of Supremacy, you simply remove the pet summons. The rest also stays the same. If we mix those 2 talent changes will result in less DPS overall, but in a much more simple and monotonous playstyle with very little to manage if you so desire, alright? Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's enter your normal rotation with the same talents as previously. So you just use all of your cooldowns, what you're gonna need to do to follow that up, and what you should be doing most of the time when playing Distraction. Well, priority number 1 is keeping up Immolate and the Life Tap buff active at all times, okay? Then using one of your Conflagrate charges if nearing or at the 2 charges. You want the cooldown always to be ticking at 1 charge because you don't want it to overcap, so you can maximize its uses. Nor you want to use both charges recklessly. You always want to keep 1 for when you need to cast those Chaos Bolts when you reach the 4 shards. And you always want to do that with the Backdraft. And you can also bank it to use when you need to move, so you can prepare ahead as well, okay? Then you need to start checking your other spells and shards. So first, Dimensional Rift. How many charges you have? You probably won't have much because you use them in your opener, but like I said before, if you have 3, you use 2 and bank 1 if you need to move in the future. If not, use all 3. If you have 2, the same thing. Either use just 1 or 2 depending if you need to move or not. The idea with Dimensional Rifts is that you always want to have either 1 or no charges, because Incinerate, which you're going to use next, has a 5% chance to give you a charge back, so you need to keep an eye on that. If you have 2 or 3, there's a risk of overriding it, so keep it always at 1 or 0, okay? Then you need to check your shards, Channel Demon Fire and Conflagrate charges again. I'm nearing the 5 soul shards, so I'm gonna use that Backdraft from that previous Conflagrate and cast the 2 Chaos Bolts, because you only want to use Chaos Bolt when nearing the 4 or at 4 shards or nearing the 5. So you want to cast the Conflagrate always before casting the 2 Chaos Bolts, so you can benefit from the Backdraft, okay? Just like it was in your opener. Now, your Channel Demon Fire, it takes priority over Chaos Bolt, but in this instance of nearing the 5 soul shards, which is your cap, Chaos Bolt took priority, so you wouldn't overcap the shards. Okay, makes sense. The same thing goes for the next Conflagrate I cast, because it was nearing the 2 charges and I don't want that to happen. But remember, always to be ticking, okay? Then after that is when you use your Channel Demon Fire, because now your Conflagrate charges are ticking, there's no risk of overcapping, Dimensional Rift is also in a safe place, and you are empty of shards, so you can cast it. Basically just use it as long as A, you're not gonna let the Life Tap buff or Immolate dot go down because of it, or B, you're gonna get Conflagrate charges reaching 2, or C, if you're gonna overcap soul shards. If those conditions are not met, you use it, okay? If you have Soul Conduit talented instead, well, you just remove all of that. Then just keep that up. Refresh, Emulate, and Empowered Life Tap buff when needed. Below 5 to 3 seconds should be fine. Then Channel Demon Fire will be on cooldown, Dimensional Rift probably gonna be as well. You have no soul shards, so now you just want to fill in with Incinerates and slowly build soul shards with the fragments back up until you reach the 4. Using Conflagrate when nearing the 2 charges and using that backdraft on Incinerates, and then when you get close to the 4 to 5 soul shards, use Chaos Bolt with another Conflagrate backdraft again, and then just use Channel Demon Fire as it gets ready again if the previous rules are met, and the same goes for the Dimensional Rifts as they appear, okay? As for your other cooldowns, like Soul Harvest and your pet summons, you just want to use them as they come back up. And do try to combo Soul Harvest with your Summon Imp from the Grimoire due to the damage boost, and only use it when you are at 4 or 5 shards phase. So when you activate Soul Harvest, you have immediately 2 Chaos Bolts ready to go. So you can make the most out of its uptime. Okay, now as for Eradication, we'll change up a bit somewhat. Basically everything will stay the same, it's just the uses of Chaos Bolt that will change, because you never ever want to cast 2 Chaos Bolts in succession. Like I said before, the idea of Eradication is that it's gonna apply a debuff for 50% extra damage. So you want to keep that up at all times. And to do that, you have to time your Chaos Bolts perfectly in between those windows. So basically, what you want to do is build 2 4 shards always in the beginning before casting a Chaos Bolt, just like it was before. And again, every single rule from earlier stays the same in terms of your cooldowns. Now, when you cast that Chaos Bolt, you're gonna have a 7-second-ish window to build more soul shards, then casting your Channel Demon Fire if ready. Remember to cast it always after a Chaos Bolt, so just to make sure it will benefit from Eradication debuff. And then, in its last seconds, you're just gonna cast another Chaos Bolt so it refreshes the debuff. Now, you want it to hit in its last seconds, not when it goes down and then you use another Chaos Bolt. No, you want to hit it as it's about to end, so it also benefits from the 15% extra damage, okay? Hence why haste is so important here, because if you don't have much like me, it becomes quite hectic, okay? But if you do have a good amount of haste, it becomes quite easy because the debuff uptime closely will match when you need to Chaos Bolt anyway. But essentially is to use Chaos Bolt, then fill in with the Channel Demon Fire when ready or Incinerate, and then when it's close to 3 seconds to end, just use another Chaos Bolt to keep it up, while at the same time have always 2 shards ready for that Chaos Bolt. Hence why haste is also so important, so you can build those shards quickly during that small time frame. Okay? If whatever the reason you lose the Eradication debuff, you want to first get to the 4+ shards and only then you cast a Chaos Bolt and start up again, okay? Don't use Chaos Bolt at 2 shards after you lost the debuff, because it will be extra hard keeping that up. If you keep losing the debuff, well, it's a game telling you that you should change to Empowered Life Tap, okay? Now with Eradication, Life Tap will become a priority to get mana. You're no longer going to use it as often because you're not going to have the buff, so you have to remember to use it frequently to get the mana so you can keep doing your spells. And that can be easily forgettable. So one small trick you can do is just whenever you need to move during an encounter is just to Life Tap, even if you have the Empowered Life Tap talent. When you need to move, for whatever the reason, just use it. Even if you don't need the mana, even if you don't need the buff, you're not going to cast any spells anyway, probably, unless you have Dimensional Rift or a Conflagrate. More often than not, you're going to have time to cast that Life Tap. So you're preparing yourself for any future need and saving you a global cooldown when you are just, doing your normal rotation, okay? Now, as for cleaving, the Havoc ability has always been the bread and butter of Destruction because it's a fantastic cleaving spell indeed, replicating all of your spells on the target marked. The idea of your rotation, if you're going to be cleaving with it, will practically stay the same, but the only thing you need to keep in mind is setting up Havoc, and the way you want to do that is to build up 4+ shards before using it, so you can just shoot 2 Chaos Bolts as fast as you can when you activate it. Now, one nice change that we got was that when Conflagrate hits a Havoc target, it builds double the resources, which means it's gonna create 10 fragments, which equals 1 soul shard. So when you start up the fight and you immediately want to cleave, and since you start with 3 shards, you either want to build up to the 4 with Dimensional Rifts, Incinerates, or you can immediately pop Havoc, obviously having Immolate active on both targets as before. The same thing goes for Empower Life, Tap, Buff, all of that. Then you use Conflagrates on both the Havoc target and your current targets, and that will generate 10 fragments. And then you will have 4, which means you can follow that up with 2 Chaos Bolts and then build shards quickly after with Incinerates and try to get 1 or more 2 Chaos Bolts in there. Again, it's gonna depend on your haste. That's another reason why haste is so important to you. And even if you're using Eradication, you throw the rule of delaying a Chaos Bolt out of the window because you have a limited time frame to cleave. Okay? If you're gonna be cleaving mid-fight, well, like I said, you need to prepare for it. First getting to the 4+ shards and only then you use Havoc. You can Chaos Bolt twice and then try to put more afterwards, like I said before. Simple. Just never use Havoc with 3 or fewer shards. If you do, you're just wasting precious Havoc uptime, unless you can do a Conflagrate on those 2 targets so you can generate 1 to reach the 4, okay? And remember to place it well, don't put Havoc on a target that is about to die, always on a target that has the highest HP, and if you're gonna be cleaving frequently, taking the Wreck Havoc talent is something to consider, okay? Now to finalize, AoE, and it's pretty similar to single target, same rules and priorities as before. You want to multi-dot with Immolates always, because more Immolates you have active, more shards you will create. Then if 3 or more mob scenarios, maybe 4, you're gonna switch from using Chaos Bolt to Rain of Fire. Simple. If you're using Fire and Brimstone, your Incinerates are gonna cleave all around, so you're gonna generate a lot of shards, and don't forget about Conflagrates, okay, so you can cast those Incinerates faster with Backdraft. Again, the priorities stay the same, so you'll be able to use a lot more Rains of Fire and even more with Soul Conduit, like I said before. Then, if you have Reversed Entropy, you won't have an issue with mana, or you can take Empowered Life Tap anyways for the 10% damage overall, and all the rest stays the same. If you're using Cataclysm or Channel Demon Fire, just use on cooldown. Cataclysm is gonna save you some time on multi-dotting with Immolates, but you're gonna generate less shards overall because your Incinerates are not gonna cleave, and you're still gonna need to multi-dot in between Cataclysm cooldowns, so that's why Cataclysm is better for burst AoE, not for really sustain, but the rest stays the same. Use Rain of Fire as much as you can and just repeat the single target snaps, okay? As for movements, as I mentioned before, you do have issues relating to mobility, but making good use out of your Demonic Gateway and Demonic Circle can be extremely helpful if nicely placed. The same goes for using an Ending Resolve, soaking up to 40% of your damage taken on just a 1-minute cooldown, so make sure to use that well to counteract your lack of mobility. Then using Life Tap, like I said before, during movement, plus that 1 charge of Dimensional Rift or even a Conflagrate that you should bank when needed. So that covers it all. That leaves us Legos, and you don't really have any that will change up your gameplay too much. Your new Lego ring is giving you Eradication for free, meaning you can combine it with Empower Life Tap, which is pretty good for that total of 25% more damage dealt. Lessons of Spacetime and Ferretry of Souls are your best in slot Legos for single target, giving you a random chance at a soul shard and making your Dimensional Rift improve your damage by 10%. So if you have that Lego, you probably don't want to spend your rifts all at the same time, but progressively to prolong that damage increase. So, okay, so one at a time. The other Lego that should change your rotation is Shawl of Yumjar, whatever it's the way it's pronounced, which will make you add Havoc in your single target rotation and increasing your overall damage by 50%, so that's why you want to add it in a single target, okay? Master Strike Restraints is one of your best in slot for cleaving, especially with Wreck Havoc for that extra cleave damage with Chaos Bolt. And for pure AoE, the Master Harvest is the best, giving you a random chance to activate Soul Harvest when spending Soul Shards. So when using Rain of Fire is when you get the highest chance at that buff, just like Soul Conduit in a way. Okay, that covers it all, and I hope it was helpful, and if you made it through it all, thank you for watching. And it might not look like it, but I'm really trying to make the guides shorter, but it doesn't really seem to be my favorite. This is what, almost like 40 minutes or something like that. There's a lot to say, man. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. Smash that like button, subscribe for more content. Have fun, guys, and bye-bye.